Welcome to this special second episode of Equalizer. My name is William Acosta. Today we are honored to welcome back Mr. James Lawler, a retired CIA case officer and one of the agency's leading experts on tradecraft, HUMINT, and Counterproliferation. Over his remarkable 25-year career, Mr. Lawler served in multiple international posts and led high-stakes missions as chief of the CIA's Counterproliferation Division Special Activities Unit. He is best known for heading the AQ-CAN nuclear takedown team, credited with dismantling the most dangerous nuclear weapon network in the history. Mr. James Lawler holds a Bachelor of Arts from Rice University and a Juris Doctor from the University of Texas School of Law. He is recognized national security consultant and sought-after speaker on insider threats, operational security, and intelligence training. Beyond his agency work, Mr. Lawler has published gripping series of espionage novels like Living Lies, a novel of the Iranian nuclear weapons program, In the Twinkle of an Eye, and The Traitor's Tale. I highly recommend the three of them to all of our viewers and listeners. Today's conversation is about more than headlines and operations. We'll discuss the real meaning of tradecraft, ethical decision-making, and the evolution of spy training, and the personal cost of life spent working in the shadows. Welcome, Jim, to this second episode of Equalizer. Thank you for being with us today here in your house, Equalizer.
It's my pleasure, William. Thank you for having me on.
What part of your early life shaped your skepticism and worldview the most?
Well, I had wonderful parents. In fact, I don't know if you remember that situation comedy in the 1950s, Leave It to Beaver, but I had a Leave It to Beaver childhood. I mean, we had a wonderful mother and father, two wonderful brothers. And, you know, I grew up in a very loving household. And so I think that certainly formed my core values of, trying to be a good person, trying to practice the golden rule. And I think that led to my success as an operations officer, that if you treat people the way you would like to be treated, it's amazing what that can accomplish.
In hindsight, how did your initial training prepare or fail to prepare you for the realities in the field? I mean, you joined at a time that the Cold War was at its highest level.
That's correct. I started on duty at the CIA in February of 1980, and the Cold War was certainly at its height and went on for another, almost 15 years. And my training was good. CIA training is quite good, but where it really hits home is when you're out in the field and you have to practice it. It's not against an instructor who is role playing, but it's against a real human being. And they say that typically a case officer, a CIA case officer, he or she makes or breaks their career on their first tour. Hopefully they can, recruit a foreign source, recruit a spy. And if they don't, it's pretty bad. And I think I told you on the last program that I had a lot of doubts about myself, because the first year I didn't recruit anybody. And I was really, very intense on trying to make this work. And finally, things started to come together. So the training is good. The training's world class. But where you really, where the rubber meets the road is when you get out there in the real world and you've got to convince somebody to commit espionage, which is what I was doing.
Was there a sink or swim moment early on that defined your approach to intelligence?
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I was drowning on the first tour, so I was sinking, definitely. but I've always been fairly self-confident, and I was losing my confidence that first year, but I've been fairly self-confident. And when you recruit someone, they want someone who's confident. Don't want somebody who's just playing around or who is negligent or careless or playing at being a spy recruiter. And I think because I'm sincere and I truly care about people, that came across. I remember in my training, we had an operational scenario where we were working against an instructor at our training facility at the farm. And in the scenario, the CIA officer, the student, is in a hypothetical, fictional country somewhere, and you are developing the employee of that country's foreign ministry. And so you're working up to the point where you can pitch this person to commit espionage. And in my case, I was doing quite well, but what I didn't know was that the real purpose of this operational exercise was that the instructor was going to reveal, right after the pitch, reveal themselves to be a member of the local security service, the local intelligence service. And then the instructor was going to whip out some handcuffs and arrest you for espionage and see how you react to being under that much pressure and being marched out of the room in handcuffs. And so I went into my pitch thinking this guy was a member of this country's diplomatic service, the foreign service, when suddenly the instructor whipped out the handcuffs, whipped out his identification badge, said, "I'm a member of our country's version of the FBI, and you're under arrest." And fortunately, I was calm, and I leaned into him and I said, "This is wonderful, because now you're worth so much more to me as a member of that service than you were before." And I went into my full pitch, and slowly the instructor put the handcuffs back in his pocket, put his badge away, and he agreed to my recruitment pitch. And later he told me, he said, "Jim, I felt like I was a bird in front of a snake." And I was the only student out of 30 students who recruited the instructor instead of being led away in handcuffs. So I think it was some natural ability that I have. I don't frighten very easily. I don't flap very easily. And I truly care about people. And I think that comes across because the foundation of any relationship, and especially that of espionage, is one of trust. And I know that sounds odd because here I'm asking somebody to be distrustful, to break their confidence, break the trust with their country. But I'm, in essence, bringing them over into my team where I want them to feel comfortable.
I think one of the hardest things for anybody to do when you're overseas is to convince a government employee, whether in low places with good access or whether in high places with a lot of access, to betray their country. I mean, it's a slow working process that takes time to build. First, a good rapport with the person, and second, that you have already studied the person's weaknesses, whether it's financial problems, whether it's emotional problems, whether it's disenchantment with the way the government is being run at the time. And that's what makes, I think, the person jump ship. And
That's exactly right. I think I've said to you before, I never once recruited a happy person. You don't recruit happy people. You recruit unhappy people, people who frequently feel like they've been betrayed first, and so therefore they feel justified. I know that seems like psychological justification, but if I can bring them into my team, then that's what I want to do. I worked against one individual for a number of years, and he was the member of the predominant ethnic minority in his, or ethnic majority in his country, or at least the ruling ethnic group in his country. But things changed. His ethnic group went out of power. A new ethnic group came in, and suddenly he found himself in a real predicament. And he told me, he said, "Jim, I could work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I'll never be promoted again." How can I give allegiance to a country which treats its citizens like that? And so I asked to meet him in another country, and I dropped my State Department cover and I said, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to join my team. And he said, now I've got something to believe in. He was looking, like a lot of people are, for a strong group to be a part of and where he would be treated fairly. And he was treated fairly. And so much so that he transferred his allegiance to us, that on 9/11, when he was at his foreign ministry and he saw these twin towers collapsing in New York, he became very emotional, started crying almost, and his colleagues were curious as to why he was so emotional about what was happening in America. And he said, they don't understand. I'm now part of your team. And he was very much part of our team and worked for us for a number of years. Finally, he resigned from his foreign service, started a business, which is very successful today. And he said his only regret is that he doesn't have a picture of me that he could put in his business with the caption, "Our founder," because I made it possible for him.
What skills from outside the intelligence provided you the most usefulness while you were going through your career?
So I have a list of 10 things, 10 qualities or 10 skills that I think are very important to a CIA operations officer. And the first quality is that of curiosity, insatiable curiosity. I'm naturally curious about people. When I meet them, I love to talk to them, to chat with them and find out all about them. And I think I have a very keen listening ability. You don't recruit people when you're talking, you recruit people when you're listening. And sometimes folks ask me if it was ever difficult to protect my cover. And I said, not really, because frankly, when I'm talking to somebody, most people are really interested only in themselves and not in me. And that's fine. I'm interested in them and they're interested in themselves. So it's a combination of interests. And then, as I mentioned a bit earlier, I think that having empathy, being able to feel what the other person is feeling so that you can address their stresses, you can help them out, that's very important. Another skill or quality is patience. I told you earlier that it took me 10 years in one case to recruit a source who had no weaknesses that I could see, no stresses, no real needs. But boy, when he needed me, he really needed me. And then another quality is persistence, not giving up. On several occasions where my recruitment failed, it's because I wasn't persistent enough. I was either lazy or I was distracted, and I just didn't persist. I think another quality that's certainly true of not only case officers, but any successful professional is creativity. Boy, we always could use more creativity. And then I've already mentioned the fact that I think I'm a pretty good observer of stressors in people's lives. I used to be a rock climber, and when you're a rock climber, you look for cracks in the rock where you can put your fingers and toes and climb the rock. And all of us have psychological cracks. We have stresses. And so over time, if I get close enough to someone, I can study and see what those stresses, those cracks are. Another quality is what I call ruthlessness, which is a very harsh term. But by ruthlessness, I mean never forgetting why you're doing this. You're doing this for the national security of America. And you're not doing it just to make a friend, just to take this person out to lunch or dinner. You're doing it to recruit a spy. And I tell students, I say, if you've never had a recruitment pitch turned down, you haven't pitched enough people. You only learn basically a lot of times from your failures. I have a talk I give sometimes. I call it My Favorite Failures, where I outline why a recruitment approach or an operation didn't turn out the way I wanted to. And I'll give you the reasons why I think that happened. And you learn more from that than you do from the successes. Also, having a powerful or persuasive personality. I think that my voice is fairly soothing. I had one asset once tell me, Jim, when you're talking, it's like my brain is in a warm waterbed. And so I think the fact that I have a soothing voice and the fact that people want to share things with me, in essence, I would become their therapist. and they would tell me things that they wouldn't tell their best friend or their spouse. For one thing, they knew I was not judgmental. And another thing was they knew that I would protect them and that I would have their best interests at heart. And finally, there's a very mystical quality that I call the metaphysics. And by that, I mean the ability for a top class case officer to make an invisible neural link into the target, the person they're trying to recruit. And that is a way to simply take the target and the case officer to another dimension, another plane of existence. And when that's happening, we could have explosions and fires all around us, and neither one of us would notice it because we're communicating almost like on another planet. And I know that sounds real mystical, real paranormal, but I've had it happen a number of times, and it works.
What is the butterfly effect of one of your missions unforeseen global consequences?
Well, okay, so my team that I led took down the AQCON nuclear weapons network. And certainly a foreseen consequence is Muammar Gaddafi, the head of Libya, would no longer have or would not have nuclear weapons. And you may recall that 6 or 7 years, well, back in the year 2011, I think, is when Gaddafi was overthrown by his people. And I guess an unforeseen consequence, in essence, was Gaddafi did not have nuclear weapons and he couldn't use them on his own people, which was good because the nuclear weapon he was acquiring had the yield of the same magnitude as Little Boy that destroyed Hiroshima and killed 140,000 people. So, I think that was a good consequence. I didn't foresee the fact that we would be saving that many people, but that was a pleasant, unforeseen consequence of my actions and my team's actions. It wasn't just me.
What is your proudest operational accomplishment and why?
Well, the same thing, to be able to prevent Libya from acquiring nuclear weapons and using them either on their own people or on some European nations as a distraction. He was desperate in the end, and he probably would have used those nuclear weapons. So I think saving lives, thousands of lives, maybe a couple of 100,000 lives, is certainly an accomplishment that I'm very proud of.
How do you manage a mission that shifted objectives in midstream?
Well, that's a great question, William. We initially started targeting the Iranian nuclear weapons program when we then had contact with the AQCON nuclear weapons network, which was a totally different target. And I had to, in essence, juggle both of these operations at the same time. We couldn't give up the initial target of Iran because that's very important, but we couldn't ignore the one that Libya was getting a nuclear weapon. So we had two things going on at once. And we actually had the chance for a third one, but I didn't have enough people and enough resources because we were very concerned about Syria. There were strong indications that Syria was acquiring a nuclear weapons capability, and we had at least a small opportunity to pursue that one as well. And you may recall that I think it was about the year 2007 or 2008, Israel actually bombed a Syrian nuclear reactor that was going to produce plutonium for a Syrian nuclear weapon. So our suspicion was correct. We simply didn't have the resources or the officers to pursue that. But in the end, it ended up okay.
I get nervous sometimes with the closeness that the Iranian government has with South American countries, especially Venezuela. And there's a lot of technology going back and forth. The Iranians open up a drone company where they supply all of the parts and they get assembled in Venezuela as we speak, Iranian drones. Do you see a problem with Venezuela, one of those countries trying to acquire a ballistic missile that could reach the U.S.?
Absolutely. I see. Venezuela has a horrible leadership with Maduro. And I thought Chavez was bad, but Maduro's even worse. So, uh, they'll do anything. His government, not the Venezuelan people, but his government would do anything to antagonize us, to irritate us, just like the Cuban government will right now. So it's no wonder that the Iranians, probably the Russians, maybe the Chinese are in there trying to create some kind of association with these countries because they know that they are at loggerheads with us. And so I'm not surprised if you say that the Iranians are active in Venezuela, and I'm sure the Russians are quite active, and the Chinese are quite active. They're going to do whatever they can to exploit the separation between the United States and Venezuela. We've traditionally, and of course, the other thing about Venezuela is it's got huge petrochemical reserves, both oil and gas. It could be a very prosperous country, and yet, they've got this sad situation with Maduro in power. I mean, he's a dictator. What can I say?
Yeah. What What is the case that you wish had gone differently?
Boy, that's a good question. I've got several. I call these my loose threads. It's like when you're knitting a sweater and you've got loose threads at the end. Well, I have several of those. Maybe a recruitment operation that I can't go into the details, but it was against a senior Iranian official, and it just never came about, and for whatever inexplicable reasons. And I have several like that. In fact, my fourth novel that I'm co-writing with my co-author, Johanna McCloy, is entitled Loose Threads, about a CIA officer who has a couple of operations that did not come to fruition the way he had expected. And even though he thought, I know this is going to be so good, and then it just doesn't happen, and it just haunts him. And so things like that do haunt you. And that's actually the theme of my fourth spy novel with my co-author, Johanna McCloy. Her father, by the way, Johanna's father was a former deep cover NOC officer in CIA. So she's telling the story from her perspective as the daughter of a CIA officer, and I'm telling it from the perspective of the CIA officer. It's fiction, but it weaves in the concept of loose threads.
Can you identify a single missed signal that could have changed the outcome of an operation?
Okay, so this one's kind of embarrassing, but one of my covers was that of a consular officer, and that means I was the guy that you go to for a visa if you want to visit the United States. And consular officers have incredible power. They can make a decision that no one can overrule. If I think you are entitled to a non-immigrant visa to go visit the United States, then I will grant you the visa. On the other hand, if I just don't like the way you look, or if I suspect that you're going to be an immigrant or do something illegal in the United States, I don't have to grant that visa. I have total control over it. So when I was in a certain country in Europe, I had good relationships with the consulate, and if they saw somebody whom they thought would be of interest to me or the CIA, they would have me come down and pretend to be the consul, down there. And I actually had to take the consular course, so I knew all the procedures. And so we got an application from an Eastern European communist country. This was back when the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc were all still communist. And this particular country was a hardcore communist country in Eastern Europe. And we knew that this one employee was a code clerk, meaning that the code clerk is the person in charge of all the encrypted communications, the sensitive communications between the embassy and the home country. And we knew that this one particular woman was a code clerk, and she put in an application to try and go to visit New York for a couple of weeks. This was going to be her dream vacation. So I was going to be the person to interview her, and I did. And I had to come up with some way to, I guess build some kind of foundation of trust with her and get her to do something that would be out of the ordinary, in fact, be something that she shouldn't do. And I had a magazine that was a ski magazine. And in this magazine was a picture of a man skiing, cross country skiing. And this fellow looked just like me. I think you've heard of the concept of a doppelganger, meaning someone who looks just like you and your friends wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Well, this guy looked just like me. And so I had the young lady come in my office and I kind of went through the interview with her about her trip to New York. She was hoping to leave in a couple of days. And I said, do you see this picture here? And I showed her the picture of the man who looked just like me. I said, that was taken, and my agent in New York would like to have this same picture reproduced in another magazine. And at that point in time, it was still in the age before faxes were very, very accurate or good. And I said, if you're going to be in New York in a couple of days, could you meet my colleague, my agent, my public relations agent, and give her, I chose a woman, my colleague to be a woman, give her this picture, and then that way I would be able to get some revenue from this. And this young Eastern European lady, she looked at me and she was kind of hesitant, but I had not yet signed her visa, and she saw that. So she kind of reluctantly nodded her head and she took the picture, and I granted the visa, and she went to New York, had a good time. My CIA colleague, pretending to be my public relations agent, took her around New York. They had a great time. I mean, she had the time of her life. She came back, and so I thought, okay, now's the time for Jim to close in and build the relationship and see if I could recruit this person, because code clerks are very difficult to recruit. And so I thought, this is my one chance to get a communist code clerk. So I called her up, and a few days after I knew she'd come back, and she was very happy to hear from me because she'd had such a great time in New York. And I said, how about if we go out and have a drink, and you can, this coming Friday, and you can tell me all about it. She said, oh, that sounds great. So then is when I made the fatal error. Like an idiot, I thought, okay, she's eager to see me, but I wanted it to be even more than eager. So I sent her a dozen red roses, which was stupid, stupid, stupid in retrospect. I showed up at this bar where I was meeting her, and I noticed that she was dressed like in a cocktail dress. I mean, she looked beautiful. I mean, it looked like she was going out on the town. And so we sat there and we talked for maybe 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And then I decided, well, enough of this, I'm going home. And she said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going home. And then it hit me. She thinks this is a date. And I was so stupid and so thick that I didn't realize that. So, I mean, it was a botched opportunity. I mean, I overplayed my hand. And, the Eastern European country subsequently fell apart. So I don't know that she would have been worth recruiting anyways, but I totally misplayed it. And I was looking at it from a case officer point of view and not a male and female point of view.
How do you work around institutionalized inertia? It happens in government agencies.
Oh, and it really happens at CIA, just like any bureaucratic institution. Well, my philosophy, you may have heard about, in missiles, sometimes they have multiple multiple independent reentry vehicles. It's not just one missile, it's like 10 warheads coming in. MIRV, multiple independent reentry vehicles. So what I would do is I would hit headquarters with not one, two, but maybe 8 or 9 operational proposals, and they couldn't knock them all down. And so if they just approved 1 or 2, I would have been in big trouble if they'd approved all 9 of them, because I couldn't do it. But I just kept peppering them with this one, and I try and inject a little humor into my traffic back home. And I had built up trust with the operational folks back home. So, and along with my, chiefs of station. And so I rarely had things just totally turned down. It was all dependent on me to come up with a good idea, and a lot of ideas. Einstein once said, if you want to have a good idea, you have to have a lot of ideas, meaning some of your ideas are not going to be so good, but come up with a lot of ideas. And that's what I would do.
How did inner office politics shape risk-taking or mission planning?
Well, at one time, the CIA was divided into, at least when I was active, into geographic areas. You had Africa Division, you had Latin America Division, Europe Division, Africa Division, Soviet Europe Division, East Asia Division. And sometimes the divisions didn't play well with each other. They became very parochial, very narrow-minded, and they would want their officer to do the operation and not have a visiting officer do that. So you had to overcome that by building networks of friends, people who trusted you to either run a joint operation in an area where you were not the host, or make sure you give them credit for all the support that they're giving you, which was absolutely important because they know the counterintelligence landscape. They know what's, all the personalities in the area, things, the danger spots, the hot spots. They know the current, scrutiny of the local counterintelligence service. And so part of your job was building bridges to colleagues that you trusted and trying to enlist them, in essence, in your operations. And I got to be pretty good at that.
How do you select and mentor promising new officers?
I do it all the time. I just met with one yesterday. I usually meet with 2 or 3 young people a week who are interested in careers in the intelligence community or the FBI or DIA, CIA, FBI, DIA. And I always, I'm asking, number one, you need to have, at the bare minimum, you need to have a good college degree. But I say good, I mean just at least a grade point average of at least 3.0 from a U.S. Or not a U.S. It can be European or Latin American college. It helps a lot if you have a graduate degree, because typically these days it's so competitive. You need more than an undergraduate degree. You need a graduate degree, maybe a master's in national security. It could be an MBA. It could be, in my case, it was a law degree. And so that has become more and more important that you have an advanced degree of some sort. I'm not talking about a doctorate, but maybe a 2-year program, a master's degree. Then it also helps if you have a good foreign language. And now the top 5 languages that we're looking for would be Chinese, Russian, Arabic, Farsi, and Korean. No surprise. Those are all hard languages, and they're languages that a lot of our adversaries speak. Now, it also helps, of course, if you have another, some other good language, like Spanish is a great language because that will allow you to operate in somewhere over 20 different countries. And so, and if you speak Spanish, there's a good chance you can speak French or Italian. So foreign language expertise is always something that enhances your resume. And then finally, I often recommend that somebody consider at least becoming a military officer for maybe 4 years, getting their clearance, work in military intelligence if you can, and that's another route to working in the intelligence community. I also, when I'm talking to young people, I measure what their interpersonal skills are. Is this person better suited to be an operations officer where you need strong communication skills, or are they better off being an analyst, which is fine. We need good analysts, or something else. And so I talk to them. I recommend books. One of the books I constantly recommend is a book called The Recruiter by Douglas London. Douglas London is a good friend of mine. He had a 30-year career as an operations officer in the CIA, and his book, The Recruiter, is one of the best books I know of, nonfiction books, about what it means to be a CIA case officer. So I'll recommend that. And if that resonates with them, then they know kind of, is this job really suitable for me? But I meet 2 or 3 people a week, or I talk to them on the phone where they're asking me, how do I enhance my resume? What else do I need to do? I'm always eager to do that because I feel like we need to continue to have the best people in our intelligence service.
What is the biggest myth about source recruiting?
The biggest myth is that it's all about money, and it's not. It's never all about money. In fact, it's never only about money. It's the other things, that we have this acronym, MICE, M-I-C-E, money. Money is really never the only motivator. The I in MICE stands for ideology, meaning I hate communism, or I hate the oppressive government in Venezuela, or I hate nuclear weapons. That's fine. And there's a lot of truth to that. But usually ideology, claiming that that's your motivation, is a cover for something else. You may really believe that, in what you're saying, but it becomes a kind of noble justification for why you're really doing it. Now, the C in mice is coercion, and that's something that I don't like, because I don't want to recruit a source under coercion and have that person like a rattlesnake in the backseat of my car. I want to motivate these people positively to want to do this. Now, the Russians, the Chinese, others use coercion all the time. We have used it in the past. I disagree with it as a methodology. But the most important part of this is E, the E in mice, which is ego. And ego is responsible for the fact that you've got your, people disrespect you, people mistreated you, you feel like you're not part of the group, you're into revenge, and that's probably the strongest motivation for espionage. And so I'm always looking for people that have those kind of emotional issues. It could be it could be the ego in the sense that you love your children and one of them is very sick, or you're going through a horrible divorce. And so you're emotionally, financially, and psychologically really destroyed. And so I'm looking for that. But it a lot of times it boils back down to ego.
What is the most devastating betrayal you experienced besides people that took an oath, that were case officers? In the case of Mr. Ames, what other cases really, hit you hard?
So I was a close friend of a man named Ed Howard. And Ed Howard and I came into the agency about the same time. And my biggest hope way back when I was a young officer was that I would be posted to Soviet Union and work against the Russians, work against the Soviets. Well, that didn't happen. I got my next choice, which was to be in the European theater. But Ed got the top choice. He got to, he was recruited to work against the Russians in Moscow, and they sent him to Georgetown to get Russian language training. And he was a smart guy. But he also had a lot of personal issues. He had some alcohol issues, he had substance abuse issues, and he had real anger management problems. And he, on one of his polygraph tests, he confessed to the fact that he had been on a flight with a woman with a young baby, and the young baby was screaming and hollering, and the woman went off to the bathroom with the baby, and Ed was so irritated, he actually rifled the woman's purse and stole $20. So we have a real integrity issue here, and Ed was basically let go from the CIA, and they arranged for him to have a job with the New Mexico State Legislature, much to my surprise, because he tried to contact me after he'd been let go, and I wasn't home, and my wife talked to Ed, and Ed said no, he was no longer with the agency, and he was now at the New Mexico State Legislature, and I thought that was odd. Well, a year later, my wife called me at the embassy where I was, and she said, look at the front page of the Herald Tribune. And I did, and it said that Ed Howard had defected to the Soviet Union. He had fled FBI surveillance and had flown to Helsinki and then to Moscow. So here's one of my good friends. We had dinner in his house several times. He had dinner in ours, and we knew his wife. But now this guy's become a spy, a traitor. And he betrayed Alfred Tolkachev, who was called the billion-dollar spy in Moscow, and because he was going to be Tolkachev's handler. But on a personal basis, every time a CIA officer is transferred from one station to another station, headquarters always does a full counterintelligence profile of you, basically listing, have there been cover exposures? Have you been, exposed to a foreign intelligence service? Well, I got a copy of the cable they sent to my next post, and it said, betrayed by the traitor Ed Howard. So yes, I was personally betrayed. And that's why none of the KGB officers at my next post would ever meet with me, because they knew I was nothing but trouble.
Wow. What did you first witness? When did you first witness a moral red line being crossed that impacted you?
Well, there were some things I wouldn't do, like I would never go after young people like in their early 20s. I just don't think that's fair. I had a very attractive female diplomat that I was developing, and it became clear to me that she was mistaking my attention for more romantic intentions. And so I turned her over. I introduced her to a female case officer, so I was not going to cross that red line. I think I mentioned earlier the beautiful code clerk from the Eastern European country. I'm not crossing that red line either. Um, and people sometimes mistake what I do, because I think I've told you quite bluntly. I mean, my job was to manipulate, exploit, subvert, suborn people, and convince them to become traitors to their country. And I gave this talk out at our NSA on their Counterintelligence and Security Awareness Day. And at the end of my talk, a young man raised his hand and he said, "Mr. Lawler, do you consider yourself to be a moral person?" And I told him, I said, "Well, I've thought about that a lot. And I've come to the conclusion that if we have a young Marine Corps sniper take an Al-Qaeda bomb maker into his sights at 1,000 yards, that young Marine Corps sniper is definitely a moral person. And as long as I do what I do for our national security reasons, then I consider myself to be a moral person. Where it may be immoral is how much I enjoy it, because I do enjoy it."
Did you ever have to choose between ethics and mission?
No. No, I didn't. Maybe I was fortunate, but I always believed in the mission. I believed in working against proliferators. I believed in working against foreign intelligence officers. I believed in our United States and in our national security. And so, now there are certain things, certain areas of the agency that I'm glad I didn't work in. For instance, I was never involved in counter-narcotics operations, and I don't know, I just didn't want to do that. It's something that the Drug Enforcement Administration and the FBI do quite well, and we give some assistance to that. But that mission didn't excite me, and the reason it didn't excite me was I've always thought that the narcotics problem we have in the United States is more of a demand issue than a supply issue. If the demand were to go away, the supply would go away. Narcotics dealers are in this only to make money. And so, I mean, that may be a simplistic view of it, but I honestly think we need more drug education in the United States. It would help if our families were more intact and we didn't have children that were, looking for some release somewhere. But I never wanted to really get involved in counter-narcotics operations. And I know they're important because, they can destabilize governments.
Are internal dissenters viewed as threats or safety valves?
I never felt constrained. If I had a contrary opinion, people would listen. In fact, I think I had a reputation for being a bit of a contrarian. Our deputy director of operations would sometimes include me in a operational discussion up on the 7th floor where he was. And he'd go around and people would be talking about this operation and how they could do it. And then frequently he would turn to me and say, "Now, Jim, give me a different opinion," which I welcomed. And so I think the agency leadership welcomes some dissent, as long as it's polite and it's not insubordinate. I think they welcome the fact that there are going to be different points of view and different methods of accomplishing the same thing. We all want to protect the United States. We all want the best interest for our national security, but there's different ways to go there. And you make a mistake if you close yourself off to people's opinions. I had an administrative officer who was working for me in the AQ-Con operation, and one time I heard him knock on my door, and he came in. And he was kind of shy, and he said, "Jim, I've got an operational idea." And he was embarrassed because he's not an operations officer. But I said, look, tell me what it is. And it was a good idea. So, uh, I wanted to welcome different viewpoints, and somebody would have maybe a different perspective, because you don't have a monopoly in all the good ideas.
What changed in proliferation strategies during your career?
We became much more aggressive during my career, which was good. It became more and more apparent that countries such as Iran and, of course, the Libya that I've already mentioned were acquiring nuclear weapons capability. And so it became much more focused. We've got to stop this. In fact, we used to have what we call the National Proliferation Center. And then we decided we don't want to just stop proliferation. We want to counter proliferation and push it back. And so, we became much more aggressive of pushing back programs. And that's why Libya disarmed.
How should our Western agencies, our counterparts, think about new nuclear states?
I think, well, certainly the Five Eyes countries, that would be Canada, the United States, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand. We have great fear of emerging nuclear states. People sometimes ask me about the Iranian nuclear program, and I say my biggest concern about the Iranian nuclear weapons program is not so much the threat that presents to Israel, although it does present a threat. But the mullahs are not stupid. They see Israel, and they know that Israel has anywhere from 100 to 150 nuclear weapons. And if they were to ever launch an attack on Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, it would be the end of the mullah regime and the end of Iran. The thing that concerns me most about Iran acquiring nuclear weapons is the nuclear pandemic that would set off in the Middle East. Suddenly you'd have the Egyptians, the Turks, the Saudis, the Emiratis. All of these other countries would think we've got to have nuclear weapons too. And when you have that many countries in an unstable region like the Middle East with nuclear weapons, the chances that there would be either an intentional or accidental release of a nuclear weapon or more is going to go up logarithmically. And it would be a dark day for humanity, not just for the region, but for the entire humanity, because it would involve tremendous radiation, tremendous contamination, a collapse of that part of the economy. It could cost hundreds of thousands or millions of lives. And so I see the threat of Iran's nuclear weapons program as setting off a contagious disease of a nuclear pandemic. Everybody will want one or more.
How do you build trust in an environment of mutual suspicion?
I think that's a good question, because, you're asking, ironically, I'm asking somebody to go from, basically from position of trust where they were a loyal citizen of their country to one of distrust there, but to trust me. And of course, that's what made it challenging. I'm building a relationship with somebody, and they have to really want to be part of my team. We used to have observation posts around Russian embassies, Soviet embassies. And if we saw 3 Russians coming out at closing time, patting themselves on the back and laughing and joking and going off to the local pub, we would ignore them, but we would watch for the guy who comes out all by himself, who's a loner and who feels disaffected and not part of the team. And that's the person we would typically go after, somebody who doesn't feel like they're part of the team. But you're right. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and especially espionage. And you have to build that trust. You have to act like you're serious. In fact, we talked to a KGB officer, or former Russian intelligence officer, and we said, "How do we recruit someone like you?" And he said, "First, you have to be a serious person. You've got to be somebody I can trust, because I'm placing my career and my life in your hands." And so if you are perceived as not a serious person and not a trustworthy person, you're never going to get anywhere.
Which foreign liaison was most challenging to manage?
Well, I've worked closely with a number of liaison services. I've worked with the Israelis, I've worked with the Brits, I've worked with the Norwegians. I love the Norwegians. They're great. I don't know that any of them are that challenging. Some of them are a little, nationalistic. That's understandable. They have their own national interests and things. Um, the Swiss can be hard-headed. Um, I wouldn't, I don't, the Swiss, because of neutrality, they want to always try and stay neutral, but they typically would see their interests being that with the West. One of our former directors, Alan Dulles, classic director, his job during World War II in the OSS was to be the head of station in Switzerland. And there's a lot of things that go on in Switzerland. And so I had good Swiss friends. I had excellent liaison when I was in Switzerland. But sometimes they could be kind of hard-headed, and that's okay.
How do you judge the credibility of a foreign partner intelligence?
Great question. So, the old saying by Ronald Reagan was trust but verify. So we would try and verify that what they were telling us was really the truth and that they're really sincere. That we don't it's not a one-way street. It's got to be a two-way street. And if they're providing us with good intelligence on a common or a mutual enemy, that's a great way to build trust. If they've got, we frequently would work with the British against the Russians, and we would share virtually everything about the Russians with them, and so that's a way to build trust. And the same with other foreign partners. If we would have liaison exchanges. And as long as it's not a one-way street and we're getting something out of it and they're getting something out of it, it's like any business relationship in that respect.
What's the deepest myth about agency's life that frustrates you?
I think the deepest myth is that we're going around with automatic weapons and we're driving Aston Martins and we're constantly dodging danger. And occasionally I had to. But the average operations officer he's typically not armed unless they're in a dangerous area. We're not James Bond, and that's just not realistic. It's and the other thing that's unrealistic is, at least on television, a lot of times they have these operations going at really at lightning speed, when in fact it takes months and sometimes years to build an operation. And of course that would bore the reader or the viewer, so they would compress the time scale. In my 3 novels that I wrote, I think I'm pretty realistic, with the exception that sometimes I accelerate the time scale, because it's an amazing amount of time discussing the operation at headquarters, doing some of the administrative work, some of the background work. You have to be very detail oriented. And none of that comes across in the movies, and very little of it in fiction.
What is the greatest underappreciated security threat today?
Well, I don't know about underappreciated. One thing that concerns me is the rise of artificial intelligence. I think that is going to be a game changer in many respects. But it's not a game ender, at least as far as the United States can continue to be some of the best, producers of artificial intelligence. It can give us a real comparative advantage over our adversaries. But I mean, it could be that black swan thing. You don't know what you don't know. And if they use artificial intelligence to use as a targeting mechanism or something like that. In fact, I had a Stanford professor ask me how we could apply artificial intelligence to human recruiting. And I said, if you can use artificial intelligence to scoop up everything off of the open source intelligence, the internet, and everything else about somebody, their marriages, their financial abilities, their divorces, their legal problems, their job problems. If you get all that together, it would provide a splendid targeting mechanism for someone like me or an intelligence officer to go after somebody.
How are the adversaries redefining hybrid warfare and intelligence operations?
Well, hybrid warfare, if you mean drone warfare, or if you mean, it depends. They certainly are being very aggressive with the construction of very sophisticated drones. Our son was a Marine infantryman in Iraq in the year 2006 and 7, and he told me if he were there today and there were drones, it would have driven him crazy. It would have been so nervous with these things. I can only imagine what's going on in Ukraine, both for the Russian troops and the Ukrainian troops. It's
Yeah,
got to be terrible.
at one time they had the jammers to jam the frequency of the drone operation, and they came up with the optical line, and now
Right.
you can jam him. And the cartels, like I told you in the last program, I mean, they take in the special forces retirees from different countries and send them to Ukraine. They have 3 different schools. They pay for their school, and then upon their return, they become the trainers, the builders of these homemade drones,
Hmm.
to set them up with explosives, with different things, to attack government, agents and military people, especially at in the Mexican country.
Right. No, it's horrifying, and you're right. Using those optical cords, they're not emitting anything, so there's nothing to jam. It's like a fishing line going out, thousands of yards or thousands of meters of fishing line, but it's that optical connection. Well, we've got to be able to come up with defenses against that and come up with our own advanced drones. Fortunately, American technology is still some of the best in the world. So I think we can develop things to and enable our allies like in Ukraine and elsewhere with it. And I'm disgusted with special forces people who go and train narco operations or our enemies. That's treason.
Yeah, it's terrible, that some, after so much training that, like Colombian special forces, I mean, they fighting all over in Africa, they fighting in Ukraine, they go and work for the cartels, because after they retire, this they only get that small pension, and there's no other job possibilities. So, I think that the countries have to do better by the retirees.
I agree with that. In fact, I read several years ago, the Chinese just launched their new aircraft carrier. And I was wondering to myself, who taught them how to land planes on an aircraft carrier? Because that's very dangerous and very tricky. And I read that there might have been some Western pilots that actually went over there and trained the Chinese. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's terrible because that's enabling the Chinese now to have, pretty
Yeah,
sophisticated
right. A
aircraft carriers.
competitive edge. If their
Right.
pilots could do or mimic what American pilots do, it's a problem. Um, who do you admire most among peers or adversaries, and why?
Well, I'm always, I let's not use the word admire, but respect. I,
Respect.
re,
Yeah.
I respect the Russians. I respect the Chinese. I respect the Iranians. I respect the Cubans. Let's talk about the Cubans for a moment. They mounted 2 seeding operations. A seeding operation is where you recruit someone who has no access but has eminent qualifications, and then like a seed, you plant them in an organization and you already have a ready-made spy. Well, Ana Montez and Manuel Rocha were Cuban seeding operations, and each one of them went for anywhere from 15 to 20 years. They were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I mean, I can't stand the Cuban intelligence service, but you have to respect them. They are good. They are really good. They're focused. Mossad is not an adversary, but they're focused. For them, like in Cuba, it's an existential issue. The regime is, really putting all of its resources into that. So I respect the Cubans. I respect the Chinese. I respect the Russians. I respect the Iranians. Yeah, I mean, you've got it. You make a big mistake if you think these people are backwards or you try and demonize them. You can't recruit people if you demonize them. So you've got to be aware of that and have proper respect. I mean, in the past, the East Germans were absolutely brilliant. Marcus Wolf, who ran the Foreign Intelligence Service for the East Germans, he was great.
Good.
He was damn good. Yeah, the Stasi were great. Yeah,
I was in Germany, I told you from 1980 to 1986, and we
right.
had Stasi, they crossed over the border, and they were all over Germany. And same thing with the smelling vehicles, the Soviet liaison mission vehicles, and they were taking photographs, doing all types of operations uh, near the military bases. And then you get soldiers that go drinking, and then they want to you know fall into the trap of selling manuals, or selling you know secret documentation that really puts uh, a very bad light to the armed forces. I
Right.
mean,
No, the East Germans were really good.
yeah, and they also had a lot of beautiful women. I think that's one of the things that I told people about the Iron Curtain. What was behind was not the old men, arguing about who is going to be better than the U.S. I think that they were keeping all of those beautiful women from us for many years, and
Right.
no matter where you travel, the women are just gorgeous
Oh,
and very
you're right.
easy
You're right. They are.
for honey trap to manipulate you know our our people.
In my book Living Lies, I talk about a honey trap, and in this case, it's a female Iranian. And of course, Persian women are some of the most beautiful women in the world. And there's a classic scene where she traps and seduces a key person who is the in charge of the cyber defenses of a cloud computing company where the agency has parked a lot of its sensitive files, and she succeeds.
If you could declassify any single document from your time, which will it be and why? Without going into the document, without.
Yeah, I guess if I could tell the true declassify, if somebody would declassify and allow me to tell the true story of the AQCon network rather than my just talking circles around it, that would be, I think, an interesting lesson for people. How long it took, what it took, the resources we put into that, and there were some of my deep cover officers who risked their lives doing this. Not me, but people who worked for me overseas. And I think the American people would be down on their knees thanking God that we had these people out there.
If you could address your younger self in training, what single warning would you give yourself?
Probably to be even more aggressive than I was. I was very aggressive, but maybe to even be a little more aggressive, not reckless, but a little taking chances a little bit more, taking being bolder. After I finished up in one Western European country, I applied to go off to Africa and work in Africa. And instead, European division came back. They didn't want to lose me, so they offered me another very nice European post. And I probably should have pressed a little harder to try and get a third world post, somewhere in French-speaking Africa.
Jim, how does one find balance after life of secrecy?
Well, that's a great question, William. I guess part of my outlet is writing my spy novels. I don't divulge any classified information. In fact, I have to submit all of my manuscripts to the CIA so that they can make sure that I have not included anything classified in there. But it allows me to still continue to conceptualize operations and talk in at least a fictional version of what some of the things I did or some of the things my colleagues, whom I greatly respect, did. I use a lot of people in my books who are patterned after my CIA colleagues, whom I dearly love and respect. And so that's a tribute to them and their courage and their patriotism.
How do you envision the future of global intelligence alliances?
Well, I think unless there's always a possibility of a shakeup in the Kremlin or a shakeup in Beijing. They are very aggressive. I'm encouraged by the fact that it looks like we're getting closer to India, which is good. We should have had a much closer relationship than we've had. The Indians see the Chinese as a major threat. And I think the Indians and us, we have a lot of similarities. We both have democracies. We both nowadays believe in capitalism. And I think, we have a lot of people from India that are some of the best people in the United States in technology and in medicine and things like that. So I would hope that we would have a stronger alliance with India.
For a closing remark, what would be your advice to young people that want to get into the intelligence field?
So get a good education. As I said earlier, increase your foreign language ability, and it can be anything. It shows that you've got a facility for, once you know one foreign language, it makes the second and the third foreign language even easier. It kind of unlocks those language circuits. Be patient, be persistent, and if you can go and get a graduate degree, that's great. But or go in the military, become a military intelligence officer, or get your clearance. The military is great for giving people excellent language training. So you'd have both. You'd have veterans preference. You might have a clearance. You'd probably have a clearance, and you'd have a good foreign language. So I would recommend that route, or work for a multinational where you could work overseas and increase those language skills and learn what it's like to live in a foreign country and see if that's what really appeals to you.
Yeah, it's a shocker when you're 17 and you're dropped in a foreign country. You grow fast. You grow very, very fast.
And that's why we look at people who are a little more mature. I talk to people in their early 20s, and I said, there's only one thing wrong with you right now, but you're going to outgrow it. And it's that you're so young. And, you need to be a little bit more mature. I was 28. I think the average age of my fellow case officers was about 26 or 27. So don't get your heart broken if you get rejected. You can always reapply a year later, or reapply when you're a little older and more mature. You've got more life experience.
Where are you teaching now, Jim?
I'm not really teaching right now. I've pretty much retired from that. I still do some commercial seminars, teaching about insider threat. But now people turn to me on LinkedIn or through Facebook, and they ask me to meet with them and advise them on CIA or FBI or DIA careers, and I'm always happy to do that. Any week, I probably got 3 or 4 of those, maybe 1 or 2 personal meetings, 1 or 2 phone calls, and but I'm not really teaching anymore. I did that for almost 20 years.
That's great. I really appreciate your time, Jim, and I hope that this is not the last time that we get together. I really enjoy talking to you, learning a lot. I mean, you have a lot of experience, and it's always good to spend some time with you.
Thank you, William. You had some of the best questions of a podcaster that I know. They're very, very profound questions, and they get right to the heart of the matter. So I very much appreciate you having me on my program, and I also look forward to a future encounter with you.
This concludes this episode of Equalizer. I'd like to thank Mr. James Lawler. Thank you once again for joining us and sharing your deep experience and honest perspectives. It has been truly enlightening for all of us. To our audience, and especially our loyal listeners, we extend our sincere gratitude and tuning in and being part of this important conversation. If you enjoyed this episode of Equalizer, please give it a like, share with your family and friends, and be sure to follow me through the links provided on the screen. Your support helps us bring thoughtful timeline conversations to an even wider community. A very special thank goes out to our production team. Without your dedication and expertise, this program will not be possible. We appreciate all of the work that happens behind the scenes to make each episode a success. Stay safe. God bless. Until next time.